Vamsi Varanasi. So good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Welcome to Austin.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, how are things?
Fantastic. It's my first time in Austin. I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, we don't have space like this in New York.
Yeah, I was gonna say New York probably in it. It's not snowing in New York, but the weather's a little different.
Way different. Way worse. Yeah. There's flowers near the highway.
I know, right? Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for sitting down with us. What do you think of the Fintech house so far?
Oh, I love it. Well, the funny story is that Sora, my previous company, we met Clear here a year ago, and so I have a special spot in my heart for the Fintech house, and of course, Jason's been a wonderful host.
Oh yeah, right. Alloy Labs doing a great job. It's good to be here too. So Clear, tell us a little bit about Clear and what your role is there.
Totally. So I'm on the Fintech team focused on a combination of product and business strategy. So the context is that Clear acquired my previous company about 6 months ago, where we're building a very similar model of Clear, but in financial services, where you can verify identity once, link it to your biometrics, and then that's portable from Fintech to Fintech. And so now we're linking that tech with Clear's great brand that everybody in this room knows, and the member base we have of over 20 million people. And so now everybody who's previously verified identity with Clear, whether at LinkedIn or at the airports or Avis or whomever, can port their identity easily into any fintech that we're working with. So very excited to grow this out. Yeah.
I was telling you before we got started, my first impression when we got connected was Clear, of course, but Clear Fintech. I hadn't connected the dots, but now that you describe it that way, it's wonderful.
Totally.
So it sounds like you're along the way as far as Clear and what you guys are doing in the fintech space. But for yourself, like you're from New York, right?
I'm from North Carolina, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What part?
Around Raleigh, right around the suburbs.
A particular town in Raleigh?
Apex, North Carolina.
I know it.
The peak of good living, they call it.
And you're born there?
I was born in Champaign, Illinois. So my father moved to the States for grad school.
Okay.
Popped around to different places in the Midwest, and then moved to North Carolina when I was 12.
Okay.
Then went to college out west, and then started the company right out of college in Boston. And then very quickly, none of the people that we hired at the beginning wanted to stay in Boston.
Yeah.
So we moved to New York fairly quickly, and that's where we kind of
got it. So you're settled in New York now. Lived in Apex. I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Really? Very nice.
Yeah. My mom and dad actually met in Smithfield, North Carolina.
Very nice.
Let me walk that back. If they watch this, they'll get mad at me.
Yeah.
They met in Charlotte, but spent a lot of time in Smithfield. So I have a lot of relatives
in North Carolina.
Tobacco country.
Beautiful.
That part of it.
But, yeah, wonderful part of town. Not too different from here.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
Carolinas too. So how did you get into fintech right here?
It's funny. So I was a research kid growing up. My father's a scientist. His father was a teacher. That's kind of the world I grew up in. Went to college to study physics. And then sophomore year, I met these guys that lived in the dorm room right below me. I went to school at Stanford, and that's kind of a place where people start companies. And so I had no intention of doing anything of that sort. I was interested in biophysics. I was going to go do a PhD in biophysics theory. I'd actually found out about all the COVID stuff and everything getting shut down while I was visiting a grad school in March of 2020. I'd gotten in, so all set to go. Then COVID happened, and so the question was, am I going to go to grad school online, or am I going to talk to my friends about ideas that we've been having? And so these guys have been thinking about problems around identity for a really long time, and so we decided to take the plunge in June of 2020. I spent about a year kind of wandering the desert, figuring out we had this broad idea of everybody should have identity credentials that are unphishable, unhackable, easy to use, and secure, right? But what does that credential look like? Who's going to pay for it? How do we get people to actually use these credentials? That was a question. Focused in on financial services because we learned about this thing called KYC that apparently every bank needs to do.
Yep.
And that kind of got us in. And then turns out it's this very regulated thing. And turns out that if you want to deal with a bank or a fintech, you need to understand how they speak. And kind of just got tugged. And here I am.
That's cool. So it was all about the problem you wanted to solve. It's just it sounds like the portability and the ease of use for identity.
Yeah, something like 3 million Americans have their identity stolen every year.
Yeah, it's.
And when you have and generally that's your SSN being compromised. And then when your SSN is compromised, what you do is you go to the IRS and then you say, hey, someone has my SSN. They say, great. And they give you another number.
Yeah.
And that fundamentally is a terrible problem, right? And at the same time, there's been technology that's existed for 40 years that allows us to prove that we know something without actually showing the thing that we know. Right? It's called public key cryptography. It's on everyone's phone. It's everywhere, right? It's the lock on the HTTPS in the browser, right? So the original idea was, how do we scale these public key credentials to every American and hopefully everyone in the world? Turns out that if I've got a strong credential, how do I actually issue that to somebody? That's the hard part. How do I verify somebody's identity to give them a credential that they can use over and over again.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how we got into identity verification and into financial services.
And did you start in financial services, or was that? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
The idea there are actually very similar to Clear, and we'll talk about that in a sec. If you can start at the highest level of assurance with identity, the eventual goal was identity is a pervasive thing, right? Every password is an identifier for somebody. But if you start at the most secure way of doing identity verification, it kind of trickles down, where I can use that credential to verify my identity at Target, right? But I can't use the fact that Target knows who I am to go talk to a bank.
Yeah.
Similar to how Clear works, where Clear we start even higher, right? If you forge your identity at a bank, you might be able to commit some fraud. But if you forge your identity on a plane,
yeah,
a lot worse things can happen.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a very similar model.
And so who led you into this? You mentioned Jason, but like where was the connection when y'all started to do that? How did you get connected, and were there particular mentors or people who helped?
Yeah, that's a good question. So all myself, Ethan, and Cole, my co-founders, we were all at Stanford where people start companies, but we were never really in those circles. We were all the nerdiest of the nerds. And so there was this one girl who I took a class with my sophomore year of college. Her name is Sigalit Perelson. And every single person we've met in the entire venture capital world, I can trace back to Sigalit.
Yeah.
Took class with, she was like into this world. She knew some people. She cut our first check. It was 2 weeks at the start of the company. She wrote us a check for $25,000. And she introduced me to somebody who introduced me to somebody who introduced somebody. And then once you like get into the world, everyone wants to talk to you. This is one of the beautiful things about startups and the whole innovation ecosystem is that if you've got an interesting idea, everyone will take a first call with you. And if it's interesting enough, they'll take a second call with you. And so they kind of went on. Can really tie back a lot of this to Stanford. There's this guy, Mike Hurst, who's a dear mentor of ours. Met him through one of the accelerators out there, who really guided us through fintech. He started a fintech out of business school, sold it to a bank, and so kind of knows both the startup side of things, how the big banks work, the whole thing. So those are probably the two people I would call out. But of course, it takes a village, right?
Oh, sure.
All sorts of people.
Yeah, we started our agency customer in San Francisco, so definitely familiar with what you're talking about with Stanford, and the whole system out there is just wonderful as far as startups and helping incubate them along or connect them with people.
Totally.
When did Clear come into the picture?
Yeah, so when we started the company, every first-time founder thinks way too much about the competition, right? You're like, I've got this brilliant idea. Surely everybody's thought about this idea, right? And so from the very early days, we were like, okay, who can build this? Clear and Visa. Those are the two people who can build this, right? And Clear much better than Visa in many ways because Clear is an identity company. So from the first day, we knew that Clear would have been a wonderful acquirer for this business. But we were building this out, so raised a seed round from good venture capitalists. Went to market, had some early traction. We're going out to raise Series A, but at the same time talking to everybody in the world, right? And actually, my head of sales at Sora, who's now at Clear, and everybody from Sora has come over Clear, met one of the salespeople at Clear in this house last year. And they started having a conversation about product partnerships. At the time, Clear had been doing identity verification in the airports for a long time and had started a nascent identity verification online business. But similarly to the airports, where it's the same Clear, the same TSA everywhere, right? There's no configurability in how you do an identity verification for the airports. They built out some of that for when they were going to sell to other businesses, but not to the level that was required for financial services, right? They weren't doing KYC grade identity verification. We had built all the tech, but nobody knew who we were. We had about 500,000 users, right? Clear had tens of millions. So it was a really natural fit there, and really happy with the marriage of the two companies.
Yeah, and when was that? How long has that been?
Q3. So near the end of Q3 is when the acquisition closed. But of course, working on that for a while.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, really glad to be here.
Yeah.
And the team is wonderful. And we worked on Sora for about three years and 2 months. Karen and Ken, the co-founders of Clear, have been working on the exact same vision and this goal of having secure identity as a platform for the internet for almost 15 years now. And as soon as we got there, the thing that struck me the most is that now there's 500 to 1,000 people who are marching in lockstep on exactly the same vision that we had at Sora. And beyond that being confirming for us, it's also like a real joy that everybody has kind of aligned on. This is what we want the world to look like.
Wonderful. It's a great solution you guys are bringing to market. What would you say is your greatest challenge like now? What are y'all facing now as far as taking this to the next level?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say the biggest thing is more customer education. there's been a way of doing identity verification on the internet, right? There's a way of doing identity verification for banks and for financial institutions. We're trying to change the way that's done, right? But there's regulatory requirements around how this works, and we've satisfied those regulatory requirements, but in a different way than the current peg in the hole, as you would,
Yeah.
right? So the main goal here is to have those conversations, educate them on not only how this is better than the status quo in the majority of cases, but even if it's not as good as it's not the best it could be, it's just as good as the status quo, right? And having those conversations to educate our customer base and to grow this effectively a two-sided network of users in the network and places where these users can verify.
Yeah, and is there any limitations to where this could apply? I mean, finance is just one of them, but
totally. And we have a big push in healthcare, where it's a similar thing where every time you go to a doctor's office, you fill in the same forms. If I go to a different doctor, how do I port my health records from one place to another place? Totally unsolved problem, leads to tons of friction. And there, the cost isn't money being laundered. The cost is care being slowed down, right? That has a material impact on people's lives. Similar thing, we have a large partnership with LinkedIn, right? The goal here is to increase the trust in this marketplace where when you want to know something about somebody, you're not looking them up on Facebook these days. You look them up on LinkedIn, right? You want to know who they are, right? When they're applying for a job, you want to know who they are, right? You want to make sure if someone's posting a job and you're not submitting all your professional history to somebody you haven't seen before. So that's been a very successful partnership.
Use cases, there's a variety of just what you mentioned just inside of that. And can you give us an example of the uses, like when it comes to clear and identity verification in the financial, and give us an example of that?
Totally. And really what we're seeing is a lot of interest beyond the traditional use cases of identity verification. This is part of the education process where right now the way identity verification is done at a fintech is you do a KYC at the point of onboarding. You might do all of the identity verification you'd ever want to do at that point. But once you're in, it's a walled garden. You can do whatever you want, right? But because the way we do verification is not so good, some bad people are getting in through the front door. And when they get in through the front door, they can run wild.
It just breaks stuff.
Totally. Yeah. And so the use cases we're seeing, and part is like, I don't want to ask for an SSN every time I want to transfer money, right? But the whole vision of Clear is once you verify identity and tied all the documents and whatever piece of information, you can re-verify with just your biometrics.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to put in more high fidelity checks in different places. So you can think every time that I want to transfer money out of my account, I got to scan my face. Maybe I'll opt into that because I don't want anybody to get into my account and try to transfer money in. Or right? Maybe every time there's a transfer above a certain threshold, I need to do a check. Maybe I need to do a step up of some sort, right? Maybe every time I try to change my password. So the use cases here at onboarding, ongoing for transactions, ongoing for risky behavior, adding on new lines of credit, new product lines, changing passwords, trying to prevent account takeover. Eventually, every login, right? A login is just an identity verification. I want to know that Rory is Rory when he first shows up, and I want to know it's the same guy the next time he comes.
Sure.
Right? So really expanding this vision of a portable identity to add new touch points within a user's ecosystem, within a bank, but also as we see fintech occur. I was just talking to somebody at the house earlier. With embedded finance, what's happening is that we've got more financial products that are being offered at non-traditional finance companies, right? That means every account becomes a bank account.
Yep.
And then you need to do the same kinds of checks at every account on the internet, right? My JetBlue card is a financial instrument. I should do the same checks that I do there at JP Morgan.
Yep.
Right? So the possibilities are really endless.
Well, that's great. And do you see any challenges with whether it's market adoption in finance, like the institutions or others, or on the consumer level? I don't know where there would be necessarily, but I suspect there are some challenges there.
This is the real beauty of the Clear brand that Ken and Karen have been building for a long time. Everybody in this room not just knows Clear, but loves Clear.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not only have we established this relationship between, hey, Clear is this business that leads to beautiful experiences, but we're also affiliated with DHS. We're affiliated with security. When you think Clear, you think biometrics. And when you think biometrics, you're probably thinking Clear, right?
Yep.
And so when it comes to building that customer trust, that's the one value that everybody there holds. We won't ever do anything to compromise on trust. Every piece of data that's ever collected is collected with consent. Every time data is shared from a user, it's done with consent. Data is never sold. Data is never bought on a user to verify them without their consent. And so really, it's been built like that from the very beginning, and it kind of had to be, right? And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where in order for that trust to trickle down from the highest trust environment, you got to do it right up there. And so every kind of identity verification we're doing, it's all held to the same standard as we do with the TSA. It just might mean that you're doing fewer checks because you don't have to. And so that's kind of the way we build this up.
That's interesting. When you described that to me, that known for Clear being known for bioidentification, it's almost to me thinking about like Kleenex and Q-tips. Like
Yeah.
it comes up. I don't know if the vision for the brand is that to be the association with all these different use cases. Is that part of the vision? Is almost powered by, or is it behind the scenes, or?
Totally. And it has to actually be in front, because if a user is giving their data, right, we're building towards a world where we want to reduce the spread of data. Today, users are beholden to the businesses that they work with, because if I, as a bank, need to interact with the user, I have to ask them for the data. But every single financial institution, every time I create an account anywhere, they ask you for data, you give them the data, you don't think about it. Who knows where that data is going?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The goal is for Clear to be, Karen calls this the identity layer of the internet, right? We don't want to do everything. We can't do everything. But what we can do is we can mediate the transaction of identity verification so that we can do so in a privacy-preserving way, give the user more control and autonomy over their identity information.
Yeah.
Connect businesses to the users in a secure way, right? And also in a way that improves the conversion of that user and takes off the overhead of having to store all the data on that user.
Right.
With privacy laws getting more and more steam everywhere, there's more and more obligations on every single business to do a better job of storing and porting that data around for a user. Let us do that.
Yeah.
And we can kind of take that overhead off and build in the spirit of these laws. Yeah. So really, we think that we're really setting the trend for how identity and personal information is going to be represented on the internet.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. It's going to be exciting to see where all this goes. And so with that being said, all the progress we've made, still a long way to go, but not so we're Clear, but in the industry, the things we're doing. Where do you see it going the next 3 to 5 years?
It's an interesting question. And certainly I kind of play between two industries. I play in the identity and the data industry, but as well as the financial services industry. I think that the promise of fintech has always been moving control over your finances closer to the user instead of being beholden to institutions and just doing what they tell you to do, right? More instruments to get more yields that you weren't able to get access to, faster payments to different places that you weren't able to get payments to. I think that we're going to see more and more of that. And I think fundamentally, there's kind of only two problems in fintech I see. There's, am I sending money to the right person? And am I making more money on the money that I have right now? Right? And I think that as we build more technology that gets to the root of those problems, and with Clear, we're addressing one of those things, right? Around identity. But getting closer to the root of those problems instead of building service level, I think it's going to really solve all those issues in a more satisfactory way. In identity, I think that we're going to build more and more user-focused identity platforms that instead of trying to tie data to the user without talking to the user, we talk to the user directly and then broker that to different businesses. Kind of like how Visa was established after seeing charge cards everywhere that were underwriting users one by one in different places. I think we're going to see a consolidation where instead of having to try to identify who a user is for the first time over and over again and try to get whatever data sources I can behind the scenes, there's going to be a utility that we go to. Hopefully that's us, but there's probably going to be a couple others.
Yeah.
Right? To identify a user in a secure way. And that's going to replace this, like, or rather augment the identity management layer that exists today that is extremely convoluted. Yeah. And instead of having who you are be part of the permissioning process, you can kind of divorce them away.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's going to be a really interesting next
totally
to see where it all goes.
It's a huge world that I really knew nothing about 4 years ago, right?
Yeah, and you coming to a place like the Fintech House and just the curated group that's here, it's so interesting and fulfilling to listen to some of these conversations.
Totally.
With that everybody's having, all the camaraderie, the collaboration, the community aspect, and then the interconnectivity of everything. Everything really is so woven together. And when you talk about Clear coming into the picture, it does feel like it layers in pretty nicely.
Absolutely.
In solving some of the problems that we have and or improving the user experience or the security aspects, I mean, all those sorts of things.
Totally. And it takes all of us, right? Kind of in the spirit of this house. The goal is for everybody to do small individual things and to build towards an ecosystem and an industry that has the one goal, right? One of the beautiful things about places like this, but also fintech in general, is that we might be competing sometimes, we might be going after the same customers, but at the end of the day, everyone has very similar goals, right? And whenever I'm having conversations with people in this house or in the ecosystem in general, it's all extremely collaborative.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the great joys of being in fintech.
Yeah, and I think folks looking in from the outside in, one, I don't think there's enough awareness of all the great stuff that this group of people are doing
Totally.
in the industry. But I think too, there's probably a perspective, depending on what angle you're looking at it from, of highly competitive and maybe not competitive in a positive way. I would argue from the conversations I've had over the years and what I've seen this weekend here at South by, it's highly collaborative. It is competitive, but it's friendly competitive.
Totally.
Everybody wants to do better by each other and ultimately serve their customers in a better way.
Totally. Even like big banks to small banks, big fintechs to small fintechs, ecosystem providers with one another, right? Everybody kind of works with each other. It's not really, everybody's trying to do the same thing.
I think we saw it earlier on the Breaking Bake podcast I just recorded, where you have Sunrise Bank and US Bank sitting shoulder to shoulder in the future as having a conversation about where they see things going.
It's one of the beautiful things, and then they're going to be part of the charge to actually make it happen, right?
Yeah.
No, it's a very exciting place to be, and I think that we're very close to actually achieving a lot of these visions, whether it's financial inclusion. I'm headed to DC in a couple of days to talk at a panel, or not a panel, but in a round table with a combination of a bunch of different folks around how do we build identity solutions in a way that's more inclusive, right? This is something people have been talking about for a long time, right? And we're very close. We're really, really close. Same kinds of things with cross-border payments, right? It's been really exciting to see these trends evolve, even in the last few years.
Yeah, with that being said, seeing where this is going and like where you've come from in the space and now being directly entrenched into finance and fintech, what advice would you give to others that might be thinking about coming into finance or fintech?
I think it's a very accepting group. A big part of this, I was an outsider when I joined this. My head of sales, who's very well known in the fintech industry, was a consultant in healthcare before he joined my small startup. And I knew him from working at a job with him. And from that, in 2 to 3 years, to everybody knowing him, they know him more than they know me. Hey, and that's because he just walked around and introduced himself to people, and everyone was really, really receptive to that. We were just at Fintech meetup last week, where you can queue up 50 conversations with people.
Felt like 50 conversations.
Yeah, felt like 50. It could be 100. I don't know. But I'm going to follow with all of them, right? And these are people I know who I'm going to talk to again and again and again. So it's more about just getting out there, coming to places like this, and the doors are always open, which is really beautiful. It's not like that in many industries.
Not like that in a lot of industries.
Yeah.
Last question, and this is along the lines of the trust that we have right now, and I would say trust in our society and trust in the financial system might be, I don't know about an all-time low as far as measurements, but it does feel like it's a lot lower than what we would like in our industry.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on how we can restore trust and faith in the financial system through the work that we're doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think about this a lot because fundamentally our business is built on trust, not just trust for the user to give their data to us, for us to custody this and make their experiences better, but also trust from businesses that are working with us that the data that we're telling them, hey, is associated with Rory, is actually associated with Rory, right? And so part of building trust, I think, is saying you're going to do something and then do it, right? And then just keep doing it. Keep saying you're going to do it and keep doing it, right? But part of that is making sure that you're only saying a small set of things, right? I think we're seeing that in the fintech industry where they talk about the unbundling of fintech. That was the big thesis a few years ago. Now we're seeing rebundling in some way as specific pieces have been really figured out, and then now it's about how they all fit together, right? So I think that a lot of, as we build an innovation ecosystem in finance, which I don't think it's all the way. I mean, the big banks in the US at least will have 40% or so penetration. A lot of it, I think, is working with all the people who are doing their specific things really well. And then building a trusted ecosystem by having everybody build trust in their specific thing, right? In my world, a lot of that is around data security, right? A lot of trust is compromised when a financial institution has a data breach, right? We don't think that's a thing that should happen because we don't think that data should always be sitting at every institution. There's regulatory requirements around this today, but you have this happen at all sorts of institutions that have your data, right? How do we build trust in a security policy if we see every 6 months there's a large breach,
right?
Well, you go work with the experts who know how to stop that, right? But that sort of thing pops up in every part of the industry, whether that's our banking systems or fintechs. Really making sure that we're focusing on stability, focusing on growing, but growing in a reasonable way, with the underlying stability of the ecosystem being top of mind.
Yeah, and I love what you said there. It's so true in life, whether it's relationships between me and you as friends, or on the business level, B2B, or at the consumer level with, say, the brand Clear. We're making promises every day on what we're going to do. Simply follow through on it, but don't make the promise if you can't follow through on it, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so what I heard you say is like, do what you do really well. And if everybody came together to do what they do really well,
Totally.
trying to maybe do too much, you can ensure that it's going to be more consistent, more reliable.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the spirit of fintech, right? It's everybody doing their thing really well and working together and seeing how they can work with other people who are doing their thing really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff, man. It's been so fun chatting with you.
Yeah, pleasure.
Glad you're having fun at South by.
Yeah. How can you not,
I know. And what's next? Greenlight Social.
Yeah.
So heading to the bar after this. Thanks for the time. Really appreciate it. It was fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great.
Yeah, brother. Thanks, man. That's good stuff. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, don't forget to hit subscribe. And if you'd like to learn more about Customer and the work we're doing building financial and fintech brands and businesses, please visit our website, customer.com. That's CSTMR.com. Or you can find us interacting with clients and sharing insights on LinkedIn. All of these links will be in the show notes.